Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. After what was, I think, an excellent day yesterday, and our thanks from Fortinet and from all of us to everyone at the Center of Excellence here in Tallinn for such a high-protein, strategic level morning, and then some excellent workshops in the afternoon. So we all enjoyed that, I know. I was just also reminiscing about the fact that we at Fortinet have been sponsors before here at the event, but we're really proud of our association. And the theme yesterday, I think, which weaved through everybody, is that this theme of the conference, to keep moving, is really important. We must keep moving. And part of that this morning with the speakers, I think, is an excellent set to help us all think about what happens elsewhere, what happens outside of NATO, what can we all learn to make sure we keep moving together against this common threat. So I think really for myself this morning, I also want to say that I really enjoyed the city tour last night. I'm sure some of us did as well. I think from looking at some of you with the coffee this morning that some of the city tours went on a bit longer, which is great. I, of course, was tucked up like a good boy in bed at 10 o'clock. But I also wanted to say the history of the city here is fantastic, and it reminded me of a piece of history to do with disruption of service. And I wonder if anyone knows what was the first nation state to prosecute a disruption of service event. Anyone know? Because it might surprise you, it was the British. It was my guys. And you might be expecting to hear some of the usual suspects, right? But it's actually the British. And if you think about how long ago it was actually 1914. 1914. And I was being told this story by Philip Ingram, a great threat analyst for cybersecurity. Some of you know Philip. And he was reminding me that 1914, the strategic effort, war was declared, and the very first act, on the first morning, after midnight, a steamer ship sailed out into the English Channel. It was a cable ship. It dragged up the cables and cut the cables. So Germany lost all its communications with its embassies and also the United States. So a disruption of service, even people were thinking then about network disruption back in 1914. So keeping moving forward, we now come to today, and we've got a rich history which perhaps goes back further than we thought, before even electronics. So what I'm going to try and talk about today is to try and get across some of the best practices and the things that we see in Fortinet as a global player, and I'm sure the other speakers will help us as well to see what else is going on out there that we can learn from today. The good news is I'm not going to be going into technical. You really don't want me to go into technical, I promise you, because my technical knowledge is not like the experts on our stand and others. But I think we want to talk about capabilities and effects. Very NATO good ideals, talk about capabilities and effects. So let's have a look first. For those of you who don't know who we are, Fortinet, and there's no reason why you should, but we're a global player. We're now the largest cybersecurity provider on the planet, and we always sell through partners, so you perhaps don't meet us direct all the time, but I think now we've earned our credibility, and the company has doubled in the last 2 years as well. I think the market tends to speak for itself, our prime products being firewalls, but the market dominance there globally is pretty strong to see. And I think that really comes from, we being a trusted partner and doing things like this today. So we come out and speak and see how we can help and share best practice. And as you go through the talk today, you'll see why. We also give things away as a lot at the moment. There's a skills shortage. It's a real big problem in the defense sector, but also a really big problem for NATO and all of us, because the skills are hard to retain and train at the moment. I saw an article this morning saying that 80% of people surveyed in IT industry are considering leaving the industry, which is a disaster. So we've got to look after our young. So this scheme here is to give free training, and Fortinet has pledged to train 1 million people for free in the world to try and address this skills gap. And our competitors and colleagues as well are doing the same. It is not just our problem, it's the whole industry has to address this, and we're all doing our bit, which is great to see. So the context for today, I wanted just to get across to you the pieces that I think are important for us, and there they are. The key one is the first one, and that little additional point I've made there. Everything I see in health sector and government sector and transport sector, the same problems exist. We mustn't worry, we mustn't get too stressed. The same problems are there. We just got to share the ideas and really change our mindsets, and we'll talk about that later. I think also industry has been driving this process, and it was said yesterday brilliantly by General Paul Nakasone about industry is really driving this now full on. The Assistant Secretary General also said this, that We shouldn't worry about, like the Cold War, we had to invent things, the defense space, and since, but we don't have to invent a new attack helicopter here. The systems and technology is there already. We just got to know how to use it and what systems to acquire and procure at the right times. I think also you can see the scale of the industry there. It's an enormous financial industry now, so it's attracting a lot of attention in governments, of course, and its national security level. I think it was said well yesterday that cybersecurity is now national security, and that was a great quote yesterday. So it's a good time now, I really think, for us this morning just to take a pause as the mists clear from last night with the coffee, and just think about how do we use some of this best practice to help us in the next few years ahead, which I think will be quite decisive. So the first thing is to say, how does global cybersecurity work? And it may be a surprise to some of you not, but there's an awful lot going on all the time, every day, a live conflict all the time out there. And if we drill down into what this is, FortiGuard Labs at Fortinet, the biggest thing I have for Fortinet is because we have over 500,000 users, 6 million devices shipped. They're all over the world. So the largest threat attack surface in the world. So Fortinet have rather neatly turned this into the largest surveillance network in the world. It's sensors, and it all reports back everything that they see that is bad. And that comes back to the central control positions, and then instantaneously, if something's bad, it gets pushed out to be blocked on every device. And this is where true integration like that will allow the automated threat analysis to make sure that we lever this data. So you can see all the time, and this particular feed here you can see live on the FortiGuard website. It's an interesting thing, especially for your junior staff to look at. It's great to see the US Naval Academy people here, but also anyone who's got young staff who are interested in these things, put them in charge of it. I always try and give young staff something every month to report back on something new they've seen. Let's empower the young, because after all, they are the digital natives. People of my generation are digital migrants. So we have to also remember that we're not alone. And every one of those pictures on there are customers of ours, but also the big one in the middle, the big boys in the middle, they fund pretty much all the research and development. The industry, the financial services industry, is 27 trillion, and the defense sector spending worldwide 3 trillion. So we can see again who's really pushing on with their data security, and they need true data security because they're regulated. They get heavy fines, heavy financial penalties. So it's being driven there, but all of these people all the time also can use and leverage that experience from that technology and just use it. It's almost mimicry, it's almost plagiarism, but it doesn't matter because it's a common shared tool set to be used against a common threat. So I thought what we'd do is we look at some of these new challenges, which are the same challenges, remember what I said, for everybody else. We all know these positive green things that are going on in our industry. These are good things, things that have happened where we're starting to get some positive things happening as the digital era starts to evolve. But the bad guys, they have a vote as well. They're watching this and they're adapting, and like in any conflict, all the times they're keeping moving, we have to also. So they certainly see an enlarged attack surface, but also they're exploiting gaps. And certainly as people fall behind, and rather than keep moving, people fall behind, that's normally because people haven't necessarily kept up to date with the technology that's out there. I think also the lack of threat automation, the threat automation coming at us is quite remarkable. I was speaking to the people in charge of FortiGuard Labs in North America, and we'll all remember the Log4j incident. It was 84 minutes after the Log4j publication of what was going on was released out there. 84 minutes later, automated threats started being monitored by FortiGuard Labs. Normally, typically, it would take a few days for that to filter through. So this is truly automated systems coming at us. We have to keep moving. We have to match it. And the biggest problem we've got, and especially in the defense sector, and it's not necessarily just the defense sector, health, particularly challenged at the moment across Europe, is the threat against the legacy estates. And people say often, how can we do this? We can't throw everything away. Well, you can evolve and adapt. And most of the industry have good connectability. Our systems connect to everything, so you can keep effectively improving your car without having to change the whole car. You can keep upgrading and improving your systems. We must keep moving. So how can we accelerate this change? What ideas have we got from what I've seen and also what might be useful for us this morning across the world? Other high-risk sectors, I've been fortunate enough to have roles in oil and gas and construction and government, military, but actually the military is, of course, a very high-risk sector because of the physical risk and now the digital risk. But of course, there are others, and we only have to think of banking and other sectors like that. Education, particularly high risk at the moment because, of course, the amount of research going on through the pandemic times has meant that there's disruption going on there in large numbers. So I thought it'd be useful to share just 3 points from a lot of the CISOs I get to speak to. It's a great privilege I have of speaking to some of the greatest minds, very busy people, often quite tired people, which is a concern to me and to you, overwork. What do they say? The real thing is to try and take away their advantage. Now, this is a military philosophy, isn't it? You've got to try and, it's Sun Tzu stuff. We've got to try and outmaneuver and outthink the enemy. But that stealth and speed, let's try and keep moving ahead. And to also use that big data. It's our data, our advantage. So you can see how that system I showed you, the threat analysis, allows us to map and work out and share, which I'll talk about in a minute, that threat data and how that can maximize the world's combating, literally, of the threat. And automation. It was really important that we today go away. We know that automation is there because the threat is automated now. We have to make sure we get automation. And it was our founder who was at the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago speaking, and he reminded everyone that you can't get automation unless you have integration. No automation unless there's integration. So we have to think about how do we get our systems integrated. So the new technology, and remember this is not designed as a deep dive into technology, let's look at some of the capabilities. Now in terms of Fortinet stuff, it's pretty straightforward. We divide it into various stacks, and your security stack, whatever organization you're in, will be in various components. But the key bit is to make sure it feeds into one central management center that has less complexity and more simplicity. We call that security fabric, and some of you will be familiar with that. And our single pane of glass approach allows a very junior employee to be able to see complete visibility and adapt and respond accordingly. But I want to really just talk for a few moments about secure SD-WAN. I'm calling it the game changer because it is. Secure SD-WAN is a game changer and certainly is game changing in the high-risk sectors outside, especially banking and SD branch. And if those terms, if you're not familiar with SD-WAN, please do go and ask at the stand. Yesterday, it was really nice to see people coming forward and asking the same questions that I do of my technical staff to say, how does that work? I don't really understand it. And that's a really important thing for you to do while you're here. The other stands, some great stands around, just ask them about stuff and just take a coffee because people have come here to help you learn and understand. It's a center of excellence. But the most important thing about secure SD-WAN is effectively it's a security overlay on any bearer system. And so the security system becomes the network. It's almost starting to flip now. So try and get our minds around that because the big advantage for military is this, is that we can send over one bearer system multiple levels of classification. And all you have to do, that can be accredited with the right segmentation. That is the game changer, because if you think about the complexity that we have in NATO and in other defense forces where we have different systems. I remember as a NATO chief of staff in Kosovo, I had 3 different computer screens and 3 different computers on my desk. I hardly had room for my notebook. You know, it was just really difficult. I still use a notebook. Okay, so the fact is that we have to try and think about how we can reduce that complexity. There's a bit of flick around. Actionable threat intelligence. It was something that the NATO people have asked us to speak about, and I know some of the people at the headquarters at SHAPE have asked our team there to talk a bit about. We have to keep moving because they're moving fast. We have to make sure we keep ahead. And to make sure we have that, we can operate at the speed of light, at digital speed, to combat that threat very quickly. Remember the 84-minute story from FortiGuard Labs. And that system there, for example, that picture is a military deployed system. It's from one of our partners, ProLinx, a UK-based system, and they effectively have a man-portable system that boxes underneath the laptop there, provide all the secure connections, which is SD-WAN, secure SD-WAN, built into a FortiGate. And it's just an example, just one example of how systems are moving on and being acquired quite rapidly so they can enhance technology and enhance the safety of all our data. And we remember when we saw this picture and we saw it moving a few minutes ago, Last year, Bernd Koenig and I from Fortinet, we spoke on the workshop and we talked about the common operational picture. And for years in the military, we were always trying to find this common operational picture. It's become like the holy grail. How can we try and find it? The reality is, it's there all the time in the industry. We do it. We do the common operational picture because we have to. We have to share all that threat data around. But it's not just for us. Quite a few years ago, our founder and several other key people in the industry and several other large companies, our competitors and allies and colleagues, all got together and formed a thing called CTA. Some of you may know about it, but if you don't, the Cyber Threat Alliance. Based out of the United States, this fused together and shared all the threat intelligence of the prime concerned threat intelligence with each other, so the industry became tighter, but also with the agencies. And if you think about it, how else can any government, any military, obtain this data? It's in our systems, so it has to be shared. So this sharing system, this public-private partnership that was talked about yesterday by the Assistant Secretary General, has already been going on, mostly invisible, and it's an open website. You can go and look at CTA and do have a look at it. It's a very interesting ideal. But this sharing of information means that we're all safer, because it keeps us all ahead of the threat, all integrated. But also in terms of the systems that are happening now, we're going from really the point systems on the left-hand side there, point products, now moving across into the future to form into a more integrated system. And Gartner have come out end of last year. We're talking about this as the Cybersecurity Mesh Architecture, CSMA, and you'll see a lot of that in the next few years. The mesh, it's much easier for us to understand the mesh, like a weave, or like a fabric. And Fortinet have been doing this for some time. So our Fortinet security fabric does this and shares those ideals, and that's where we think the industry will go. We've been doing it for about 10 years. Gartner says this is where we have to go now, because that integration of all products talking to each other all the time, sharing information, tightening that fabric is the way to go. We've also been asked by our friends at NATO to talk about zero trust. Now, I don't know about you, I don't like the word. Because zero trust, we've had a lot of people come back to us and say, it implies that it sounds like you don't trust your own staff, which is a terrible thing if you're a leader or a manager. But of course, the reality is, it's not so much that, but there is an insider risk. And if we're in high-risk sectors, we have to worry about that. And it was great to hear one of the students from the United States Naval Academy tell me about trust with verify, a much more practical industry term, trust with verify. Or reality, it's just verify, constant verification. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, I know most people are, effectively it's the electronic roving sentry, someone coming around. We're being checked outside to make sure we got things like passes and badges as we come in, but also to make sure that for us, that these systems are built in, and we've built them into our prime products now because people want that, and everyone will start to do this absolutely right. So zero trust, the whole principle, it's a philosophy, not a particular product. It's a way of operating that effectively says, I'm just going to ask you for your identity, automatically if need be, but quite regularly. What about deception technology? This is something that always excites the military audience because we like that. Deception and concealment is a principle of military defense operations, and we're part of a defense operation. And if you're in nature, you've got various deception techniques to ensnare and entrap your enemy, but also in military, historically and currently, you have different deception techniques and camouflage and concealment. So why not? Why not start using the psychology? Back to what we said earlier, let's start levering the data, let's start taking the fight to them. Let's make it really hard for them. Deception technology is fantastic for this. So one example of deception technology is where you have an advanced early warning system that basically shows you that someone's in your location because they think they're in your folder set, that they're not. They're actually in a replicated folder set where the folders are effectively empty, and they're hunting around, and you can then be alerting your staff automatically 24/7 that something's going on. They're also being segmented and trapped themselves, but also if it is an insider threat, you can see where it's coming from and make sure you can close this down. So it actually also helps, especially with our sensitive documents, people inside just having a bit of a dabble. And I think all of us, if we all search our souls, have probably thought a bit temptation sometimes on a big shared folder drive to have a little look around. And that's the sort of technology that will prevent this happening, because it would be unprofessional, but also it would break classified rules. So quite a lot of technology there, but let's talk about the mindsets. This is the thing I really want to try and get across today. How do we actually change mindsets? How do we try and get our approach to change? Other high-risk sectors are doing it, so let's look at an example of how a bank would work. I always say to people, if people are worried and concerned in the defense sector, I said, don't get too worried, just look at how the big banks do it. Now, Fortinet are very fortunate. We secure about 70% of the FTSE 100, so a lot of those large organizations are secured, so we speak to them and talk to them all the time, but actually they go about it in quite a professional approach, and there's an example. But focus on number 5, and wonder how many times that we're guilty of just going straight to number 5. Public sector, often a bit of a challenge, because the ones above need quite a lot of work, and everyone's busy. Everyone's very busy in their day job. Get more automated, they'll be less busy, more time for this, of course. But I think you just want to focus, especially the ones I've put in bold, making sure people are coming in and showcasing the new technology. Some incredible stuff going on with data management systems at the moment, outside the security estate as well, and therefore I think that sort of looking around, having a quick check, should almost be the same as we would use reconnaissance in the military sense, make sure we're looking around. That's a big common fault, and Moore's law, we know, is going to keep moving. So we've got to keep moving, same as the conference tells us to. So about public sector, though, because surely it's easy with a bank, right? Because it's a bank's got lots of money and we have a tighter budget. But here's an example, a live example of something that happened recently with a major government department in a European country, very, very large, 70,000 users, live operations. And just look at that process and follow it through as to how it evolved. And it works. And people like ourselves will put in a lot of staff to make sure it all goes through smoothly, and then the system runs on. The useful thing for this government department, like they often find, is it's a cost saving, because nothing to say that by constricting your technology choices, that you're also constricting potentially commercial options. So there's a really interesting part there. With government and other bodies, a lot of vendors like ourselves are looking to do longer term models which save up to 50% of the outlay cost. Now, people in the room may not be too impressed about that and say, okay, not my bag. I bet the chief financial officers and ultimately the NATO member countries would be very glad as well. So we all have a duty to keep looking around at good value where we can. So really to summarize and just sort of bring this together, I've put together what I think are 5 takeaways for us all to keep moving this morning, to make sure these bold mindsets can be applied to this new technology that's happening. I think really we've got to remember that the technology and the way that things are moving now means that we have to ensure that we are always ahead of the game. We have to keep moving. There's never been a better time now to do exactly what we're doing today. You've taken your time to come to this conference. You're looking around, you're thinking. You didn't sit at home, you decided to come here. So you've already made that leap. So we must make sure we encourage others around us to just take time. I always used to encourage in all our departments every month to make sure we had 1 hour, a bit like Google taught us to do, to sit around and brainstorm and just work out. Especially, let's get the youngsters doing it. They're very well informed and they like that. It's retention positive, and often they come out with some terrific ideas. But also, to make sure the next generation technology being there, operating all the time, every day, especially on the difficult ones like Christmas and New Year, the times when we know the threat goes up and people come at us, I think we have to deal with ever complex threats all the time. So it's already happening. Let's not worry, I mean that, about the technology. Technology, remember the banking industry, is driving on. We've said about how the mesh and actionable threat intelligence, this integrated, moving data around, taking the fight to the enemy, maximizing and leveraging our data. Exactly what we're trying to achieve in common operational picture and all the advantages of digitization in the military sphere. I think also we need to remember that the people and processes are the things we really want to study and look at. Remember what I've said about some of those best practices, and perhaps best practice discussions in all of our operations and headquarters we work in would be a good idea. And lastly, I think the real important thing is to ask. And just get people to come and talk and present. There's no shame in that at all. I think often people think, well, they're expected to know everything. I have to get my staff training every week for at least 1 hour to keep up with the company's technology. We have more technology patents than anyone, all the industry put together. We have an enormous amount of technology developing all the time. So if I have to tell my staff to train, how can I expect our customers to be doing that? We serve the customers. So just ring up the various vendors. There's a few great technology companies out there. Get people to come in and help you with it. But whatever happens, we all know that if the threat's moving faster, we have to as well. And we have to keep moving. Thank you. There's a few moments left, and if anyone's got I can hardly see anything here with these lights, but if anyone's got any burning questions, I'm happy to take a question should anyone have that. No, that's great. Well, I look forward to chatting to you afterwards as well, but thank you again for the Center of Excellence here, putting on a great event, and we look forward to seeing you tonight at the dinner as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Chris, please remain standing.